McVey Law Firm in Kingsport, talking with Lee McVey about a term that we hear pretty often, but we may not know exactly what it is, and that is power of attorney. Lee, thanks for having us out today.
Sure.
Well, certainly one of those terms that you hear a lot every once in a while, but it can mean so much. So let's talk a little bit about it.
Sure. So, we get that a lot. What's a power of attorney? Do I have power of attorney? What does that mean? Those sorts of things. Typically, when we're talking about power of attorney, there's two different things. You're talking about a power of attorney for, I just call it power of attorney for finances. Durable power of attorney, it's what you're going to use at the bank or somewhere like that to operate on somebody else's behalf. Then you also have a healthcare power of attorney, which is the same thing, but at healthcare providers being able to make healthcare decisions for someone and those sorts of things, so you can make those decisions on their behalf. Both of those sort of have the same concept. Hey, you're going to appoint somebody that's going to be able to make those decisions on your behalf, but we typically divide it up into two different things. One for your stuff and then one for your medical needs.
Which is a big decision then. I mean, those are big responsibilities that you're giving someone that power over.
Right. It's a very big decision, and sometimes people get caught in paralysis by analysis, and they don't know who to pick. They don't know who should do this and those sorts of things. And that's what we do. We'll sit down and say, hey, here are some good options and here are some good people to choose. But it's very important to have those in place and not to let yourself, get too caught up in who you want to do it.
So who should be having a power of attorney? What kind of person might say, you know what, maybe I should look at getting a power of attorney?
I think everyone should. I think everyone should have that, because you never know when that might be necessary. So a lot of times it'll come up in the obvious scenarios are if somebody's incapacitated, if they have to go into an assisted living facility. Those are pretty obvious situations. But you never know a situation when you might have an accident or something like that, and you still need somebody to act on your behalf. So I think everybody, even if you don't have a lot of quote-unquote stuff, should look at getting a power of attorney and see what they need to do to have a power of attorney set up.
Which is interesting, because usually I think of, power of attorney, I think of someone that's older, that's sort of making some of those big decisions. But really, it's something that we should think about at a much younger age.
Absolutely. I think it goes hand in hand with doing some estate planning and getting wills in place and things like that. And so whenever any age, you should really be thinking about a power of attorney. If this happened, who would take care of my things? Who would make sure that my bills are paid and things like that?
Are there some problems that you should be aware of when it comes to power of attorney, or things that you should be thinking about?
Well, sure, and the biggest thing sort of goes hand in hand with what we're talking about. One of the biggest problems is not having one. And so if the alternative to a power of attorney is a court proceeding, it's called a conservatorship. And conservatorship can be it's very expensive to go through, and it can be sort of time consuming to go through that too. A lot of times we'll have situations where people come in here, they'll say, my brother or my parent is not able to make decisions for themselves, but we need to get access to a bank account to make sure their bills are paid. If they don't have power of attorney, our only alternative to get that access is to go to the court and go through a conservatorship proceeding. And so that's one of the bigger problems that we see, is not having it. The other problem that we run into a lot is, wills are very easy. Wills, they have a law that says, hey, if you sign your will, you've got two witnesses, it's a valid will. The problem we run into with powers of attorney is that each place that you're going to take that power of attorney has its own, and I'll blame it on lawyers, has its own lawyer there that's going to determine whether they'll use that power of attorney or not. And so in the past, it wasn't a big deal to have a power of attorney that was, say, 2 pages long that said, hey, this person can do anything that I can do. Recently, what's happened is those financial institutions have gotten concerned and they want to protect themselves. And so they'll say, no, if it doesn't specifically say you can do this action, then we're not going to let you do this action. And so the big problem we see now is powers of attorney that are too broad, that just sort of don't state some specific things. And so most attorneys that do estate planning will know now, hey, we need to list specific items and things that can be done in that power of attorney to make sure that when you take it to Bank A and Bank B, that they'll both accept that power of attorney.
Well, and there's a lot of trust that you're putting in those people because they actually have more control at sometimes than you would have yourself once you've given it to them.
That's right. You want to go through that process, and a lot of times it's not as difficult as people may think because parents choose their children a lot, or siblings. They'll choose their siblings a lot too. But it is a lot of trust and a lot of authority that you're giving that person to operate on your behalf. And what I think we're especially good at here is when people come in and say, well, I don't have that obvious choice. You know, I don't have a child that I can name as my power of attorney. We'll start to explore other options with them and say, well, have you thought about this person or that person? Do you have maybe somebody at church that you particularly trust, and would you feel comfortable with them doing that? But that can be another holdup is, you know, I don't have that obvious pick, and who am I going to choose to do that, and who? And it comes down to trust. It comes down to who do you trust the most to be able to take care of these things.
But important to have those conversations and have them early when you can make those choices.
Absolutely, because if you don't make the choice yourself, then it's going to get made for you if you're in that position.
All right, obviously a very important topic. Lee, thanks so much for explaining for us today.
All right, sure.
And if you would like more information, you can always stop by or give them a call. It is McVey Law Firm right here in downtown Kingsport.
The preceding portion of Daytime Tri-Cities was sponsored by